Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm It's Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I am playing the Cold War game mode again, and I am taking my second look at playing Eastern Alliance heavy tanks. The first being the T-72A, which was a previous premium Era 2 heavy tank that was a season pass reward. And in this video I am taking a look at the T-72A, which leads on to the T-72AV. All of these replays, there are three for you today. I am playing this vehicle stock, or sort of half, three-quarters stock, grinding my way through the vehicle, and I found it's just sort of competitive straight off the bat, and I had some really good games, so I thought I'd show you these games and talk about how I'm finding playing Eastern Alliance heavy tanks and my thoughts on heavy tanks in general, in sort of Era 2 and Era 3, and in Cold War in general. The first replay, as you can see in the background, is on Fisherman's Bay, and then I have two more for you. So let's talk about the T-72A a little bit. Stock, because I am playing all these replays, stock as I've just said, the hit points are 2,650, which is very low for Era 2. Fully upgraded, you get that up to 2,850, which is not too bad, but it's not as much as some of the tanks get, which reach about, I think the top is about 3,000 hit points. View range stock, it's really poor at 435 meters, and you can get that up to 460, which is still fairly poor for Cold War tanks, especially in Era 2, but obviously there has to be some kind of balancing mechanic, because the heavy tanks are so damn powerful and they have such good attributes in pretty much every area. Engine wise, this tank has an 840 horsepower engine with a 20.22 power to weight ratio. You can go 60 forwards and 18 backwards. This is what I found, is that you're just so competitive in terms of mobility with medium and light tanks and tank destroyers, that if you want to be, the most competitive in Cold War, I don't know why some people would choose to play other tanks apart from just to have fun and for a slightly different kind of play style. Now we get on to the gun, which is a really enjoyable aspect of pretty much every Cold War vehicle that I've played. There's always a bit of variety. There's a lot of DPM, you can get a lot of damage, and the potential is there to have absolutely insane rounds and make a lot of silver. The gun is an 125mm cannon with 550 alpha damage on its APF SDS rounds and 550 alpha damage on its heat rounds. Fully upgraded, the penetration is 408 on its APF SDS rounds and 420 on its heat, which is fairly low for sort of Era 2. Again, it's a kind of balancing mechanic, because heavy tanks are so strong, especially the Eastern Alliance heavy tanks, that a lot of them have sort of spaced armour on the front and kind of heat rounds that are a little bit redundant anyway. You get 372mm of penetration when this is stock, so in these replays I'm going to be playing with 372mm of penetration, and as you can see I purely carry APF SDS rounds. Base reload is 10.9 seconds, with an aim time of 2.3 seconds and 0.35 accuracy, which is improved dramatically with my commander and equipment setup. You get 6 degrees of gun depression, which isn't too great, but you can make it work in a lot of scenarios, and you have great attributes of the rest of the tank to make it work. 14 degrees of elevation. Armour wise, there's nothing really to shout about with this tank in particular. Most things are going to go through you with their standard rounds, and even the heat rounds, because there isn't an awful lot of spaced armour compared to a lot of the other heavy tanks in Cold War, especially the Eastern Alliance heavy tanks. Turret armour is okay, you get 280 at the front and 260 on the sides, and of course you can sort of wiggle that, and you might get the occasional ricochet, but I found people usually butter through this tank in Era 2 with the other competitive tanks at this era. First speeds wise, the turret traverses at 34 degrees a second stock, or base, and the hull traverses at 46 degrees a second, base, which is pretty good. It's very manoeuvrable. It's a very mobile tank. I mean, a lot of the heavy tanks are in this era. As you can see, this Mobat in the background trying to sort of circle me. But I'm able to keep up with the Traverse of the Mobat, which is an extremely mobile tank as well, and it's just so fast paced and sort of fast and furious, especially in Era 2 and Era 3. So my commander and equipment setup, the equipment setup that I use on this tank is advanced loader, gun stabilizer, and I actually use the traction system, which means that I can now go 66 forwards and 20 kilometers an hour backwards, and it improves my turret traverse speed by 2 degrees, meaning it's now 36, and my whole traverse by 4, meaning it's now 50 degrees a second. So that gameplay in the background, we finished with a really nice result, 6.7k direct, 1500 assistance, 2 kills, and made a bucket ton of silver, as you do in Cold War. So we're going to head on into the second replay. I'll just talk you through my commander setup, and then we'll talk about the gameplay at hand. So I'll see you there in a bit. So we're now on the second replay of the video. We're on Chaobang, and I'm just going to talk you through my commander skills. I have an 8 skill commander that I've been using with this tank. And the 8 skills that I use are Sixth Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Snapshot, Rapid Aim, Situational Awareness, and Run and Gun. Basically, as always, Sixth Sense and Born Leader is kind of a necessity, I'd pretty much say, on every tank in the game. Rapid Loading is obviously to get the reload down and get that DPM as high as possible. Then I have 4 gun handling skills and situational awareness to try and help the really poor view range and try and outspot at least the heavy tanks that I'm coming up against, and maybe some of the medium tanks, of course, with the camo that the lights have, and some of the tank destroyers. I'm going to really struggle to spot them, but you know, obviously, as I said in the first replay, that is a balancing mechanic. The final slot, if I was to recommend anything, maybe would be something to help the traverse even more, kind of like a, I think it's like a clutch braking skill, isn't it, that you can get. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, it is called clutch braking, or armor angling, something like that. Something that is a very sort of typical heavy tank skill, track mechanic, or general mechanic, something like that. So about this gameplay, I've pushed to this very aggressive location in D4. I like to come to this position because it kind of spots out players that might be hiding in that sort of north-west corner of the map, sort of between A1 to 4 to D1 to 4. A lot of tanks like to sort of come down that way at the start of the game, and if you rush into position you can sometimes catch them. And tanks do like to sit in B sort of 6, where my medium tank and light tank is at the moment, and they have shots for what you spot. And you also have this position here, so if they come up through this little sort of ridge with the buildings on the sides, you can get here, and this is a good place, I should say, to use the 6 degrees of gun depression that you have and the turret armor that you have, and sort of get a shot in and fall back down. And if they come after you, you usually have a gun line. I don't have too many people behind me at the moment, but usually you will have, like, you know, TDs, kind of heavy tanks sat up there on that ridge line, just to the left of me now, and if they rush you they will get shots into what you're spotting. So as I've been waffling on, we've picked up 2.5k direct damage, blocked 500, and now got 490 assistance damage. And with this, you know, like, relatively high alpha, especially from coming from World War II, and this incredible DPM, you rack up damage so quickly playing Cold War, and especially in Era 2 and in Era 3. I really like it though, because you make a hell of a lot of silver, and if you're thinking about starting Cold War and you're kind of from a sort of World War II background, as I did, this is a sort of playing ground to make silver. And you play enough, and as more variety comes into the game, obviously I think this December we're getting the British, a British sort of tech tree in Cold War, and that means that you get you know, more variety and more enjoyment, and you end up really enjoying the tanks. And it's just a nice change of pace. It's a lot faster, but you know, you can make silver, you can get through ops quicker that way, and I really recommend trying Cold War out if you haven't already. So we put a few more shots in, went up to 4k damage and 1.1k assistance. Gonna just try and push. I'm really confident in this tank It hasn't got the armour that I know a lot of the Eastern Alliance tanks do have in Era 2, especially Era 3. The sort of crazy spaced armour where you're just struggling to penetrate. Because obviously when you're firing, like I am, full APF SDS rounds, you get penetration drop off over distance. And with the True Vision, you're going to be firing, you know, quite far in the distance, and that penetration is going to drop off quite a bit. As you can see there, I used my tank as kind of like a block for that light tank, which is something that's a really good thing to do with heavy tanks, either Eastern or Western Alliance. You use the weight of your tank and your speed to ram tanks that are lighter than you, and that's a good way to push up your damage total even more. And in that sort of space of time, we've now up to 6.1k direct damage, and it's nearly 1700 assistance. And we kind of predict where that armadillo was going, and that's really satisfying. Unfortunately, he didn't have more health, but nice to get those pesky armadillos out of the way. I'll be putting up another video on armadillos and what I think about the changes to them very shortly. So now there's 2 tanks left on the enemy team. It's this M60A2. We're going to put a shot in and then come in from this side as he's falling over, using our tank as a battering ram. I'm trying to use my hit points because, you know, you can't take them into the next game with you. I'm having a good game, I just want to try and push it up even further. And that's all she wrote for that game, firing celebration at the victory. And yeah, hopefully we're going to finish MVP. I can't remember if we did. Yep, we do in this game. 4 kills, 7k direct damage, 1600 assistance. It's a first class. 1648 base experience points, 179,000 silver, I should say, and a nice chunk of commander XP towards my final commander skill and towards my next module. So we're going to hop into the final replay, and I'll talk you through what I'm thinking in that replay. So see you there in a bit. So we're now in the third and final replay of the video, and we're here on Redshire, which is a really nice map. It's nice to have this back in rotation after such a long time, and we're going to see what we can get up to on this map. So what do I think about heavy tanks in general? I kind of alluded to it at the start of the video. I just think that they're kind of ever so slightly too mobile, a little bit too powerful because of that reason, because they have that armor and that you know, that mobility, and they have really nice guns. They're able to kind of do pretty much everything apart from the sort of camo rating that tank destroyers and light tanks have in Cold War. But I find that they're so good in the other areas that kind of negates the fact that they have, you know, poor camo rating, sort of, in a lot of cases, fairly mediocre view range. I'd like to see them maybe, I don't know, change slightly. It might just be an issue with the lack of variety at the moment. It kind of feels like all of the heavy tanks are extremely competitive, and you know, it'll be nice to have sort of slightly different kind of heavy tanks. I know the Eastern and the Western Alliance differ kind of a little bit in terms of their playstyle. The Western Alliance don't have that sort of spaced armor that kind of protects you from heat rounds as much as the Eastern Alliance heavy tanks, but all in all, I think they're both really powerful tanks. And if you look on it's whatclans.br, I'll try and link it in the description, that it will show you that, you know, that they're kind of played the most, and they are the most competitive in terms of, you know, they're the hardest tanks to 3 mark, that kind of thing. And it would just like, I'd like to see sort of, I don't know, maybe a slight change. I know people did complain about the light tanks and the camera ratings and that kind of thing, and the unfortunate part about that is that it kind of gave it a kind of different play style and something different in the heavy tanks. It might have been kind of a bit unrealistic, people were saying, but I mean, this is an arcade game after all, with elements of realism in it, so I don't think necessarily it was a really bad thing. I think things like the armadillo were broken, but I think maybe they need to rethink about balancing it out some way. It's still really enjoyable, and I think maybe with more variety, maybe it will change my opinion a little bit as people play different kinds of tanks. I know I've kind of enjoyed changing and playing like the tank destroyers and trying out some of the light tanks, etc. So yeah, we'll see what goes on. So in this game, I've kind of pushed down this kind of 6 line. just below the ridge in front of me there, and a lot of these tanks now are congregated on the other side of this ridge. They've kind of stayed that side. A lot of my tanks are still on the 9-0 line, which is a very good broad-in zone in World War II. A lot of tanks go that way, but I haven't noticed a lot of tanks in Cold War go that way. It kind of all happens, and all the brawling happens on this little hill here, and this is just enough sort of gun depression at 6 degrees with the T-72A to sort of poke over on these ridgelines and get shots into the cupolas and, you know, the turrets and the hulls of these tanks over here. I noticed that M60A2 is fired. I don't want to get hit by any ATGM'd or anything like that, and I'd like to get rid of that BMP2, because light tanks, you know, they're, as I always say, very, very powerful, especially at the end of the game with their mobility and their camo rating. I'm going to let that repair naturally as that T-72A is fighting me, and I'm going to try and juke him, and I'm going to go for the tracks because he is exposed on that hill. I'm going to try and help my 934 out here. I take an ATGM there, I believe, or a shot from somewhere, but because of the sort of spaced armour, I mean, it doesn't have as much, as I said, as the other Eastern Alliance heavy tanks, but it does have a little bit, and that can save you from getting fully penetrated by ATGMs and from your heat rounds. So I always try and keep your frontal armour facing your enemy. Kind of basic stuff, but a lot of people might not kind of do that. You can kind of wiggle your sides at enemy tanks with tanks with a lot of spaced armour, especially if they've got spaced armour on the sides, and try and get like heat rounds and ATGMs absorbed into the kind of tracks, and they do minimal damage. And sometimes I've used ATGMs on Eastern Alliance tanks, hit them flush in the side and done 0 damage, which can be really, really frustrating. Obviously it does depend on the penetration values. So we're kind of floating around this kind of 5-6 line, just shooting at whatever comes over. We've now got a chance to finish that BMP2 off, and we get a nice shot in. This tank is really, really nice. Well, the gun's really, really nice on this tank, and the main reason for that, in my opinion, is because of the shell velocity it has, which is 800 meters a second on its standard APF SDS rounds, which is extremely quick. It's like a laser. It's very, very useful if you do want to auto aim. I don't recommend auto aiming like every shot. Some people kind of go around auto aiming and they're complaining that they're missing, but they're trying to shoot light tanks that are extremely mobile, and everything's so mobile that you don't want to auto aim on moving targets. But it can get you out of a sticky situation if you want to poke and get a quick shot off. And 1800 meters a second means that your shell gets there very quickly, and yeah, you don't have to lead as much. So it might be a nice sort of little kind of practice kind of tank practice kind of session for people that want to play World War II about leading targets, and then you can go down to tanks that have less shell velocity. Do bear in mind that the heat on this has about 920-ish meters a second shell velocity, so you do have to lead a heck of a lot more. Well, yeah, double in fact. You have to lead twice as much with your heat rounds. HE, I didn't really mention at the start of the video, but I'm pretty much certain that so many players don't use it in Cold War, and I recommend that you don't. I find them largely useless. Just stick to the great shell velocity and penetration of the standard rounds, and use heat if really necessary at long ranges, because you don't get shell penetration drop off. So we've picked up 6.7k direct damage so far in this game and 2.4k assistance. Just trying to use the gun depression on this ridgeline to get a shot into the M60A2, this giant kind of sort of nodule tumour thing on top of that tank, and we do get a shot in, bringing our total now to 7.2k direct damage. And we're gonna just pop over, quickly get a shell in, and we miss our shell. I didn't realise that the M60A2 was fully loaded at that point, but we had a really good game. I did risk at that point possibly losing the game. I thought that we had it kind of wrapped up, but we're just gonna see what happens and see what our team do the rest of the game. Looks like our team are going to take this one down. There's only one tank remaining on the enemy team, and it is that M60A2 with 195 hit points, and this T-72A has enough hit points to go over, but the T-72M1 comes from the rear and finishes that tank off. And we've had a fairly good impact in that game, and a very nice combined total damage of 9.6k. Make a lot of silver. That's the Master Badge Ace tanker. 1689 base experience points, 7.2k direct damage, and 2.4k assistance. So a very, very nice game, and we are heading towards getting, I think it's the final turret module and the gun, and then we're going to try and grind our way towards the T-72A, which looks a lot of fun, and try and get into Era 3 after that. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you're all going to have a really nice week. I hope you've all had a nice weekend. I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.